Hi everyone, and welcome back to Parkitect. Today we're going to be going out in the Wild Wild West and visiting the park that's called Western Roundup. It's an old Wild West town that's seen some better days. If you can get past the heat, there's lots of space for a large amusement park. This scenario actually has a few requirements of having at least 500 guests in your park, having a happiness rating of at least 75%, and selling at least 800 park tickets, and the optional goal being to complete all of those before December year 2. Sounds like a fun time, so let's hop right into it. Well, if there's one thing that Parkitect's taught me, it's that there's a learning curve in every game. I'm a huge League of Legends player, and I thought the learning curve for that game was pretty tough. But for Parkitect, it's honestly equally as hard. Obviously, it's different. It's a completely different genre. But this park was extremely challenging. I think a lot of people in the comments are going to probably let me know that I skipped Victoria Falls, I think is what it's called. And that's the third park. But there was kind of like a branch in terms of the directions that you could follow in the campaign. And I saw the Wild Wild West theme, and I could not avoid it. So hopefully you can bear with me on that. I guess it won't be next episode, since as of recording this now, this episode turned out being way too long. And so this will end up being split into two parts. I'm debating whether or not I want to have that second part go up on Wednesday. I'm thinking I probably will. It just really depends on if I'm able to get more content for next Sunday done. If not, then part 2 of this episode will go on to next Sunday. But the park's challenges for this were incredibly hard. You had to have 500 different guests at the same time and sell 800 tickets. The 800 tickets actually came pretty quick. And then the guest happiness of above 85% I did almost instantly. So that was a pretty easy one. But 500 guests is really, really challenging. And I'll go into some of that later. But for right now, let's take a look at what we're building on the screen. Because this is one of my favorite coasters in the park. I only ended up building 3. So I guess it's not made to choose from. But I would say that it is either my favorite coaster in the park or tied for favorite coaster between this one, and I'm not going to spoil it, but one that will come later in part 2. This took heavy inspiration from Cedar Point. Actually, most of the park did, if I'm being honest. I love Frontier Town. As I mentioned, Maverick is my favorite ride, so I've spent a lot of time in Frontier Town when I'm at Cedar Point. And this coaster here is actually a runaway mine train. And although Cedar Point's is more of a mine ride rather than a mine train, it's virtually the same thing. Just the aesthetics are a little bit different. So a lot of my inspiration for building this came directly from Cedar Point's mine ride. The layout is definitely different. I would say that since the mine ride's been around for a long time, it's definitely seen its better days. It's pretty janky, and on a lot of the turns, you're shaking from side to side and your neck might hurt by the time you're getting off the ride. So I did try to make a lot smoother of transitions in this. The layout is also rather large. When I first built it, I really liked that. And as I kind of continued on building the park, I didn't like it as much just because it took up so much space. I'm not sure if there's a problem with that. I also don't know exactly how realistic that is. I would say that wooden coasters tend to have a bigger footprint, depending on the manufacturer, obviously. Some, like RMC, are really, really good at weaving in between, but there's others that really spread out their rides. And that's not necessarily a problem either, because there's tons of steel coasters that have really, really long out and back loops. But then again, I would still consider that compact in terms of like narrowness, but you're definitely taking up more space in the park. The other thing I really wish I would have done with this, with the mine train, is added a brake run-in so I could have a realistic 2 trains. At the end of the day, the game actually put 2 trains in for me, and that's fine. It's not incredibly realistic because there's no way they would, without a block run somewhere in the layout, there's no way they would have 2 trains on there. It's just too dangerous for safety reasons. But for the game's sake, I let it happen. And it was nice to see 2 different cars go on the track at the same time. Although most of the time, there was always a line in the queue for this ride, but the coasters were never full. And maybe that's just because the park layout was so wide that people were really like spread out across the park. I'm not entirely sure, but it was still fun to see this because it ended up being right in the middle of my main street, which was something I was going for to begin with. Because as soon as I saw the layout that I was going with the queue, because I was trying to make a little bit longer of a queue, it just looked like something that you wanted to like sit down on like a bench and just watch. It's not necessarily eye candy, but it definitely has some of those qualities where you could, while you're eating your lunch or something, just sit down and take a look at the station and watch the trains come in. Maybe not quite as exciting as watching a steel coaster like Millennium Force or Maverick or something like that, or even like I would say Top Thrill Dragster or King Ka would be better. Those kind of rides are definitely a lot more interesting to watch, but I definitely like the eyesights that you can take a look here at the station. Another thing that's really exciting is that I built my first real station. I know in the last episode that I kind of like played around with it and I covered it up with a hanger, and that was about the end of the day. So there really wasn't much design, but I actually built one and I really, really like it. And this park actually really stretched my inspiration for different stations. And if you do stick around and watch part 2, which again, I'm not sure if it's going to be coming out on Wednesday or Sunday, but you'll get to see, I think, 2 stations that might even be better than this one. And I really liked how this turned out. The Western kind of theme, it doesn't have a ton of variability in it. A lot of it is very basic, like flat facing walls with, different types of wood. Maybe some stone like on the bottom as supports, but mostly just wooden pillars and supports and detail and things. So there's not a whole bunch of like depth in terms of variety that you can go in, but I was really happy with, and you'll see this throughout the course of the park, how I was able to change the color scheme on different buildings. I would take a color from a previous building or a station that I made, and then I would just slightly offset that, maybe tint it like a little bit more yellow, a little bit more orange, a little bit more red. There was one that even ended up green, which you'll see here in a second. And then just have all the different detailing be slightly different shades of that. Or, a gray that has like a tint of whatever main color that building is. And I think that really turned out well. And it really provided a lot to the aesthetic of the park. On top of that, I tried to make sure that all the detailing on the building was slightly different. So every single building has a slightly varied detail. And I think even in the station, I had that a couple times where the rooftops are different colors and the different like levels. And the different levels was actually my favorite thing. The fact that the beginning part of the queue actually has a separate overhead. And the reason why I do actually do so many of these like tunnels and like not quite pavilion-ish, but sun covering things is I thought at first that this park was going to be so hot and so sunny that guests were going to be tired. And I actually did see that throughout the course of making this, that the guests were really, really tired and that they would constantly sit down. So almost all of my buildings, if there was a pavilion or covering, I don't even know what the right word for that is right now, but I'd put benches underneath it, and as soon as I put a bench down, all the guests would flock to it and just sit and block from the sun. But for being a desert, and this is something I'll probably talk about in the second video too, it rained and rained and thunderstormed and rained. And as soon as I was like strapped for cash here in a second, because I didn't do the best with my loan management up front, if I put a new ride down, instantly thunderstorms. All the rides are closed. Now I can't have any money to build anything. And I just invested like my $3,000 that I had into this brand new ride. And I was really scared that the park was going to close multiple times during this. And that's actually probably the reason why the episode ended up being 2 parts, was my poor money management up first. The park was actually in the green for a long time, but it took a while to get there just because I spent so much up front and I took out 2 loans, which is another thing I wish I would have known. Because if I would have known that you could only take out 2 loans at first, I would have definitely taken out the more expensive ones. Maybe that would have had the same problem then, where I'm stuck trying to pay them off every month and I can't keep up with like the monthly payments because I'm not getting enough for admissions. Although I did, towards the end of the episode, try to like really pump up the numbers for how much I was charging for each ride. And that seemed to fix it. It didn't look like many of the rides were suffering in terms of like attendance because of the ride prices. So I don't know the actual stats and like And I think I talked about this in episode 1 a little bit too. I don't know what's the multiplier. I've seen online some places they say that if you take your either excitement or your intensity and multiply it by 2 and then divide by 10, that's how much you can charge for the ride. So if an excitement is 60, you multiply it by 2, you're at 120, and divide by 10, you can charge $12. That seems like a lot to me. I'm not entirely sure the fundamentals behind that, but it sounded reasonable enough. And I didn't quite push it to that extent on any of the rides, but I did have a bunch of flat rides later on that ended up being charging like I think $10 or $12 for each one, which in real life I don't think anybody would ride. It makes me think of they have these things called Scene 75 here, at least in the Midwest, that are indoor parks, and they charge nothing for entrance. It's free to walk in, but every single different game, or they have laser tag and indoor golf, and they have a few roller coasters actually inside, but they charge you for each one. And if this was realistic, which obviously I know it's a game, no one would spend $12 once they're inside the park. Granted, the park only charges like $1.50, I believe. No one's going to pay $12 for one ride. And there's tons of people, which thankfully they did this because I needed the money, but that would get off the ride and instantly get back on. And, that's great for me, but in real life, no one's going to pay $12 to get on the ride, wait an hour or more potentially because, the time in this game is really hard to figure out, and hop back on, wait another hour in line, pay another $12. I can't see anybody doing that realistically, but you never know. There's some people that are true enthusiasts, and maybe. But I guess that's just part of the game. It has to be a management game somehow, so there has to be some sort of cost and profit making. So you take it with a grain of salt. Now here we're getting into what I was talking about earlier on, which is that I tried to really diversify the colors, and these buildings that I first built were really, really plain. The ones I get to later on, I think we'll build one of them here in this first half, and then a few more in the second half, and then a couple, I think, off screen when I was finishing the park. I really started getting into more detail and variance in terms of the shapes of the building, but still trying to keep with the basic Western theme, which is the flat, facades, I guess. And I did a little bit of what I did in the previous 2 episodes, which I really like the 3 wide paths. It lets you put decorations and things in the middle, and it really tends to add to not only the guest happiness, because they really do care about details in the park, but just to the eye candy and things to look at too. I think I said eye candy about 4 times this episode, so that may be overused a little bit, but I definitely like it. And the benches, like I said, incredibly necessary, and it gives you good looks at what people are doing and lets people eat too, since most of the food courts that we put in are right here in this middle section of the park. And I guess I skipped over while I was watching the building of the mine train, but rock work in this game is expensive. It's not cheap. I mean, it's not as expensive as real life, obviously, but I really wanted to make, in this section here, I had put the twister down earlier, and yes, the twister will be in almost every park. If it's available to me, it's going to go in. It's one of my favorite flat rides. There's just no doubt about it. I cannot wait. I don't know actually if there is a chair swing, but there is a chair swing, and I can unlock that one too. Chair swings and twisters will be in every single park. But since I had to add one in, I originally was going to try to hide it behind the main street, but it ended up being too hard to figure out how I was going to connect all the staff paths without, showing the staff paths to people and having a twister back there. The logistics just didn't add up. So I thought it'd be really, really cool if I could add some rock work as kind of like a backdrop. It also would help out the scenery for the coaster as well, and it would give a little bit more interaction between the coaster and the rest of the park. I did steal a little bit of the inspiration for the little section area where we switched the ground from sand, I think, to rock or sandy rock. I'm not entirely sure what the name of it is, but I stole that from the front of the park. But I decided to change the support system for the outside pavilion, I guess. And I think that variance, like I've said multiple times now, really helps out a lot and makes for a better feeling park. What I'm really interested to see is as we go through future episodes, how different styles will be. I think that I was pretty well set up to do a Western style park. I've seen enough of that, and it's not a terribly difficult theme to build, so I lucked out pretty easy there. I did try to push the boundaries, like I've said, and it really tested me in terms of creativity. And if basic Western buildings are testing me in terms of creativity, I think we're in for a long series of events here in the future when we get into some. I don't know if there's any medieval parks or. I do think there was like an Arabian theme at one point in time or fairy tale themes. But some of those themes I might have to do a little bit more research on because it's just architecture that I don't know about. And architecture is not my major. I'm a computer science guy. I can code the game, but I can't make anything look pretty. But, it's still something that I enjoy doing, even though I'm not good at particularly. And like I've said before, hopefully as we go along, the experience that I get from doing things like this will help in the long run, and we'll make some prettier parks. Because at the end of the day, that's why you're here watching this video. You're not here for my commentary. I stumble over my words. I don't say the coolest things in the world, but I'm trying to pull out cool parks that you can envision yourself potentially being in real life. And that's for the fun of the game. That's the fun of the theme park genre. There's obviously some fun in building death parks, as you call them, and having rides that aren't actually finished. So when people go on them, they either go in the water, or that was a big thing in Roller Coaster Tycoon 3 when the coasters would explode. I actually just saw a video in my timeline the other day of someone doing just that, a park where no one survives. And that's a lot of fun to do too. But the other aspect is just doing the realism park. And this park is definitely, out of any of the parks, I've been playing roller coaster simulators since I was in first grade, and they let us have access to the computer lab. And this is the most realistic park in terms of layout and looks, but it's also the most expansive park I've ever built too. And I'm pretty proud of that. And I think that's part of the reason why I'm okay with this video being in 2 sections. It does make me think about whether or not going down the line future, if you guys are interested in doing these 2-episode things. So, although I've probably mentioned it before in this episode, and I'll probably mention it again in the next one, please just let me know if you like this format for longer episodes. I'm really nervous of putting up videos longer than 20-ish minutes. I think 20 minutes is already pretty long as is. And as a brand new channel with not a huge following yet, not only is it a lot of work up front, which is not a bad thing. I'm enjoying what I'm doing, so it's okay to do that much work. But I don't know if the audience retention is quite there yet, because there's not a huge following of who I am. So if you are watching this and you get this far into the video, and you do kind of like the format, and you're willing to stick with me to the second part, and in future parts if they end up going a little bit longer, doing the 2-parters. Let me know what you think. And if you have any other ideas that I have not, mentioned yet, I'm fine with, trying out different ways of doing it. So I am open to options. And please feel free to leave me those options. Now, I guess where we are is I'm finishing up the last little bit of the right side of the main street. The path on this is kind of strange because I wanted to have like a back little alley behind the first flat ride, which I'm not sure what that's called. That's pretty bad, but it ended up being a little bit bigger than I wanted to, and there was a little bit of wasted space. So I tried to stick in these little like outcroppings of decoration where I'd put random barrels and crates and wheels and cow skulls and whatever else I could find. And I think that helped a little bit, but there probably was a little too much empty space here. So going forward in future parks, I'll try to work on that. But I don't think it took away too terribly much. I was also too afraid to put trees on the map. I'm a huge fan of Silverette, and I've watched him play through this one before too. I'm not sure how I feel about trees in the desert map. I mean, it does add greenery, and my park here really lacks greenery, but it's just so hard to tell if it's worth adding trees when there probably wouldn't be. I mean, this is a complete sand map, so it's not like they added artificial sand. It truly is all sand and desert. So I'm not sure what kind of trees would actually survive in this kind of climate. But I mean, take it for what it's worth. I think that with the cactuses and algae or whatever, algae, aloe plants, it turned out looking pretty okay. And I think this is going to be the last building we're building here in part one. And it might be my favorite Main Street building so far. The color scheme I really enjoyed. And yeah. So, I think I will see you all in part two, hopefully Wednesday, maybe Sunday. Make sure you leave a like and a comment. And I will see you all on the next one. Take care, everybody.